Hello and welcome to the Rangers Review Morning Briefing. I'm Jonny McFarlane, and today I'm joined by Tommy McIntrye, esteemed Rangers author and managing editor of This Is Ibrox. Tommy, welcome.
Good morning. I can't get enough of those intros. I'll take that every single Tuesday morning. Listen, thanks very much. Nice to be here, and hi to all the listeners.
Yeah, it's not very often I get to use the word esteemed with Derek and Joshua around, so there you go.
I was going to say it's not often it gets used with me either, but I'll definitely come back if that's the intro.
Okay, Tommy, we've got tons to talk about today, not least, obviously, Rangers against Ajax, which is starting this evening. Looking forward to that one. I will be there at Ibrox. I'm also going to be at the youth game, actually, so I'm looking forward to both matches. That one's at Firhill in the afternoon. Don't know when. Still not got that far into my day, but I'll be finding out pretty shortly. The big news from the pressers last night, I think it was around 5 o'clock the pressers started. I was on a day off yesterday, but on the injury front, Tommy, Rangers are going to be quite decimated. Now, we know there's already problems in that regard, but Yilmaz is going to be out for weeks. Lundstrom is obviously suspended. We knew that, but again, that's a big loss, especially given how he played against Aberdeen. And Ben Davies, although it's not a serious injury that he suffered at the weekend, he will not make this one, but should be back for the weekend. So Ben Davies out, Yilmaz out, Lundstrom out. The only good news is that Glenn Kamara's back. It's going to be something of a piece together side, isn't it, against Ajax tonight?
Yeah, I think the word jigsaw is probably coming large in the mind there. I think you're absolutely right. The key point, I think Giovanni van Bronckhorst was confirming that Yilmaz will be post World Cup due to the hamstring injury nature of that as well. I think the suspension at Lundstrom that you referenced there is pretty key in the centre midfield, where we're a little bit patchy sometimes, even when we've got a full complement. Although I can't remember the last time we actually had a full complement. It seems to be that we're playing it by numbers. The big thing for me is that Yilmaz, Davies, Goldson kind of selection there. You're missing big gaps in the wall. And particularly Davies, who I think has looked ever more impressive. Every time you see him on the pitch, he's really, really calm, really controlled on the ball, willing to move it a little bit better than maybe just the 5 or 10 yard pass that people get frustrated with across the back four. So, we'll see Barisic come back in, and then, we've got King in there as well. Maybe Sands will drop back in. No matter who plays in there, I think we can all be fairly certain that it's not what we would have picked, not what we would have wanted in a game where we're really looking for something tangible to take away from what's being a relatively, let's just go with bruising since it's early in the morning, bruising Champions League campaign.
Yeah, certainly. Now, this centre-half situation fascinates and appalls me, Tommy. I've got to be honest. I sat here on this video at the start of the season talking about the embarrassment of riches that Rangers had. Now, at that point, John Souttar had come in. The situation to allow Leon Balogun to leave seemed to me to be entirely sensible, because you have a young talent in Leon King who needs to get game time. But I don't think any of us expected Leon King to become a first-team pick, a first on the team sheet job. But there's been just an unbelievable level of injury around those centre-halves. When you look at Connor Goldson, who's been an Iron Man for so long, just never out, gets an injury. Ben Davies has had a stuttering start, but looked, as you say, I totally agree, very, very good in the small amount that we've seen him so far this season. Helander, obviously top player, but just constantly injured. It's really been a difficult situation, hasn't it? And Rangers are now at their bare bones. And if I told you at the start of this season that going into the final Champions League game against Ajax, Rangers would have a partnership of James Sands and Leon King at the back, I mean, would you have believed me?
I probably wouldn't have believed you. It'd be no harder to believe or disbelieve than we begin into the last game with 0 points and with a terrible goal difference as well. So take your poison there from what you want. But you're absolutely right, and I think the majority of people deal with the elephant in the room first with this, growing noise that's been rolling on of we should never have let Leon Balogun go. He's the person we should bring back and all that type of thing. Well, he's doing really well now at QPR and stuff like that. But it was the right decision. Rangers were in a good place. You can't legislate for injuries. Although, I mean, I'm sure our insurance premiums are through the roof by this point in time as well. But for me, up until Davies has got real potential, I've always maintained, when I was speaking to the guys at This Is Ibrox, anybody else in the, my friends, etc., that Philip Helander is the best defender at the club, but we'll never see him again. I think Philip Helander is a ghost somewhere out there in the footballing wilderness. Suter, exactly the same. He was bought as a bit of a, you take a risk, that as a gamble, right? In terms of, you knew what his injury basis was. And then you had, King, Goldson, etc. Sands being able to drop back in there, we've already referenced. Worst case scenario, potentially a John Lundstrom as well, if it really came to it. But the point is, you make about King, you're absolutely right. So it's great to see a young player, and I'm sure the listeners, yourself, everybody else will be in the stands tonight, where I'll be too, love the fact that he's a homegrown young player who's been in. We always clamour for that. Grow your own, get them involved in the game. If you're good enough, you're old enough, yada, yada, yada. Somebody ring the cliche bell first thing in the morning there, right? But the point is, we also know what the flip side of that is. Overexposure of a young player, potential to physically degrade them, potential to pick up injuries, potentially have their psychology damaged because they're part of mass defeats or whatever. Yeah. Now, King looks like he's made of really sturdy stuff, right? Kind of Rangers teak, if you like, and he'll do absolutely well. But you don't want to be in a position where you're relying on young players. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in that. Now, to broaden out the question a little bit, it depends where you go with that. Is it you can't legislate for injuries? That's unfortunate. Thank God we've got a little bit of a wider squad and a good pipeline from the academy, but we can drop somebody in. Or was there a strategic misstep there because we knew the likes of Suter and Helander had long-term injury problems, and so should we have went a little bit further and retained a Balogun or brought somebody else in, particularly when you're shuffling right backs out of the door and then spending money on left backs who take a little bit of time to embed? That's probably the wider pool of frustration that goes alongside those questions.
Yeah, totally agree with that. For me, it's one of those ones where I think Leon Balogun, because of his injury record, and his age, Balogun himself talked about this in an interview with while he's down at QPR. People looking at the number and thinking, right, okay, well, it's time to move forward, and I think that's probably part of it. It probably is part of it, but I think if you're looking back with the idea that you now have that retrospective knowledge, probably you would have kept Niko Katic on the books just for that final year of his contract. Now, I know there's all sorts of problems with Niko Katic in terms of his retention of the ball, his ability to progress it out of defence, and we can't look past those, even though there's a lot of fans out there who loved his rugged qualities. But in a perfect world, given the situation as it stands, and given what I would imagine would have been a paltry transfer fee to get Katic off the wage bill, rather than a transfer fee that would be attractive to the club, I think that if you look at that, then that might have been a good thing. But do you know what, Tommy? At the time, I would not have been back in that strategy, and that comes back to the whole thing that you said, which is you just can't legislate for this level of injury. Connor Goldson retains his Iron Man status, then Rangers are absolutely fine because you've got Sands, you've got King, you've got Lundstrom potentially able to drop in there, and it's not a problem at all. The issue is once Goldson drops out, then it's a big vacuum, and it's a big hole to fill for anyone, given the amount that he's played over the period that he's been at Rangers. And that to me is the big problem with this Rangers defence. Connor Goldson has his ups and downs. I'm a huge fan of Connor Goldson. I know not everyone is. And I think you can see what he brings to the table when he's not there. He's an organiser. He's reasonably good quality in terms of his passing. I think Leon King's actually done really well in that regard. And against Aberdeen, I have to say, King and Sands being able to progress the ball, I think was a big part of the cohesion going forward of the team. They were very good in that regard. But Connor Goldson's a big miss. Let's move this on slightly and talk about this game ahead and what it means. Now, there's a number of things, Tommy, that are at stake. Not least the fact Rangers won. I think it's 2.7 million euros that they pick up in prize money. If they get a draw, it's 900,000. So serious cash on offer. I mean, 2.7 is not a stone's throw away from what you would get from finishing second in the Scottish Premiership. I think it's 2.8. So that tells you all you need to know about the size of the prize fund for winning a Champions League game. So there's that. Then there's the whole thing about pride and not having this awful record continue and not being ending up as one of these nightmare sides who just had an absolute shocker in the Champions League across 6 games. And then, if you want to be ultra optimistic, Tommy, I'm not an optimist. I'm not that optimistic a person.
Go on, I'll play the other side of the coin then this morning, Jonny. I'll do the optimism. Right?
You could say that Europa League position is still up for grabs. Fundamentally, Rangers can qualify for the Europa League in this game. They have to win 5-0, but it's there. Out of all these factors, what's the narrative through line that grabs you the most?
Well, I'll park up the calculator result there in terms of what we need to do for the 5. But yeah, listen, the Champions League campaign started with getting there, and it was fantastic. We know all the narrative round about the finances, etc. You're absolutely right to draw them out from a results perspective, which we completely misstepped. But it's led to a wider thing for me, and I will come back to the nuts and bolts of that question in a second. But it's in terms of where do the support see themselves as the Champions League, because it's been quite an interesting watch as well, with Giovanni Bronckhorst saying, we can compete on the odd game, we can go toe to toe on a night, but we can't compete. We won't get X. They spend Y. We're spending a lot less, and how that matches up to the expectations we have of ourselves and our club as a support. That's somewhere that there's a Venn diagram with, let's be pragmatic in the middle of it, and I don't think pragmatism is something that we generally share quite a lot in the stands at Ibrox. But getting into the results themselves, I've said before in this podcast this morning, it's been bruising. It's been really, really tough to watch. We've had some decent moments. First half at Ibrox against Liverpool, first half at Ibrox against Napoli, before the sending off and they're just deciding that the game was done and we weren't going to bother, respectively, in those 2 games. It would be nice to get a result this evening. It would be better to get a performance as well. And I'd probably say that for a couple of bases. Right? One, the fans need to go with the team. But I think on this occasion, the team need to bring the fans with them. Right? The weight is on the team here. They need to actually step up and perform. It can't all be Ibrox and the fans will roar us on. Give us something to cheer every now and again. You know what I mean? But I think psychologically is the big thing for me. So it's been pretty damaging. You've seen John Lundstrom in a press conference recently, backing the manager by saying he sets us out in a way to play. It's us that's not delivered. Okay, so it is filtering through. You're seeing Giovanni Van Bronckhorst talking about not being able to compete as opposed to just the odd night. So it's filtering through. They're trying to set expectations there. But as you turn back domestically, so we won't qualify for Europa League, right? It's not going to happen. I'll happily come back on here and eat whatever type of hat you want me to, right? If we do turn Ajax over by 5 clear goals tonight, right?
Look, everyone will be so happy you won't need to come back on. Everyone will forget.
Right. I'll get away with it. It's a win-win on that occasion, right? But the point being, as the guns turn back to domestic fare, and that we need to keep building the momentum that comes off the back of some decent results domestically as well. Livingston aside, you don't want another massively damaging defeat. It's bad for team morale. It's bad for individual players. It's bad for the perception the fans have of the management and the wider structure behind that and recruitment, etc. It's bad for the brand. Having been pretty badly treated by teams in the Champions League, we don't want that, because you have to have one eye on trying to get other players to come in as well. So, I've given you a lot there, but ultimately it would be great to get something. Do I think it will happen? I'm not entirely convinced it will. I think Ajax, even if they rotate, will probably be a bit stronger for us for some of the reasons we've touched on with the injury basis as well, although I go and hope tonight. But it'd be good to pack it away even at a low level, just so we can get back to what's really important for the rest of the season, which is getting back the championship trophy.
I think on paper, Tommy, this is the easiest game in the group, and therefore I think the expectation should be higher for this game than they would normally be for the other ones. Napoli are a phenom this season, and that's just been incredibly bad luck to get a third seed. I think they were third seeds anyway. That has been just so outstanding, not only domestically but European-wise, and to perform that way out of nowhere, because certainly you would say their form last season under Spalletti wouldn't suggest that they would be at this kind of level.
Yeah.
So that's been incredibly unlucky. You're effectively drawing, a Man City or a Real Madrid without even realising it on that one. And then you've got Liverpool as well. Now, you look at Liverpool's domestic results and you think to yourself, well, what a brilliant time to have drawn them, because they're just not putting it together at all. But it didn't happen. I don't want to go back down the route of those games. I think especially the game against Ibrox, despite the promising first 45 minutes, was not something we want to ever discuss again or look at again. So that's obviously been a disaster. But the thing is, in truth, Liverpool are obviously miles better than Rangers. Napoli are miles better than Rangers. But while I think Ajax are better than Rangers, they have better players, they've got better structures, they've spent much more money. I think it's £97 million on players, although they did have a lot of players go out. I think there isn't that big a gap that there is between Rangers and Liverpool and Napoli. It's much more attainable, and you saw that the way Napoli tore Ajax asunder. So I would put this game more in line with the games that we saw last season in the Europa League, like against Leipzig, for example, against Dortmund. That is more the kind of standard of task I think Rangers have got in front of them, rather than taking on two teams who I think are absolutely in Europe's elite. So in that context, I think you can see a showing tonight that is gutsy, brave, and with Ibrox behind it. And with that in mind, there's a possibility. But I also think these injuries have just pushed it to a level where I don't think you can have the same level of expectation that you would normally have. It's really disappointing because there's real momentum, Tommy. I've not enjoyed the last 2 months. I don't think any Rangers fan would have enjoyed it. I don't think any Rangers content creator would have enjoyed it, because having come off the highs of last season, which was a bit of a roller coaster in of itself, but the highs were so high, to go through this funk this season where no one's particularly happy, no one's particularly engaged. There's a sense of malaise that is spreading around every aspect of the club in terms of, I think, the relationship with the fans and the club itself, certainly by social media. That's made it difficult. And suddenly you just see how football changes everything, because on Saturday, that was a performance. Well, it was less of a performance and more of a sort of electroshock therapy, wasn't it? It was just out of the it was just an out of the blue spark to the system, and 35 shots, 70% possession, complete dominance, a performance from beginning to end. Players who haven't performed well recently suddenly back to the kind of form that we can expect. Fashion Sakala flying down the right wing, looking like an answer down there. John Lundstrom pushed forward into number 8 position and performing unbelievably well. And all of a sudden you think, crikey, this looks like what we thought Geo Ball would be. I don't like this Geo Ball thing. I don't know why I'm doing it. I'm propagating it myself. It's really bad, so I'm going to stop doing that. Apologies to everyone who's offended and rightfully offended. But you know what I mean? It's like suddenly the two-part that everyone's in has been absolutely brought back to life almost, and then you go into this game with all these injuries against a really tough opponent, and you just think to yourself, if Rangers can go in and get a draw, I mean, get a win would be unbelievable in terms of just pushing that forward once again and giving people that light, that hope that there can be a turnaround.
Yeah, sorry, I was still recoiling from Geoball there. It has to be said that was a difficult moment for everybody involved with this podcast. I was hovering over the leave studio button there for a second, but swiftly moving on for the sake of the listeners as well. I think everything you say there is absolutely legitimate and correct, right? And don't get my previous comments to say that I believe getting turned over by Ajax tonight is acceptable. I still bring the fact that I'm a Rangers fan and we should always be competing to most conversations. I do think the injuries will have a massive bearing on the game, to be honest with you, in the setup that we've got there as well. But in terms of bringing that shining light, that you're talking about, it has been, and we all know fine well that people, the fans, are less inclined to air let's say, negative views. I'm not saying illegitimate views, because there's definitely some problems that Rangers need to face into at a kind of club level, right, in the way they treat fans and interact with them. But less inclined to lead with them if things are going well on the pitch, right? So much, so normal, so forever in terms of football, right, and fans.
Yeah.
That's not happening because we've been getting a bit of... I mean, we're not miles away in domestically. It's just not been happening, right? If we can get something tonight, it does give a little bit of a lift to the fans. It says that we can actually compete, because of some of those games you've referenced last year as well. We can compete with European teams. The Champions League, everybody talks about it being a step up. It's quite clearly shown there. We've kind of shot ourselves in the foot in some games as well, it has to be said, and there's been moments that have just turned against us. A little bit of naivety as well, right? But we're not a terrible, terrible side. Do need freshening up, but we're not a terrible, terrible side. In terms of the wider aspects that you talk about there, and the club negativity, the malaise roundabout, that's not going to go away. There are some cases to answer. The AGM will be really interesting, be even more interesting depending on how results go and lead up to it. But, the club, I think, are trying to recognise some of the missteps they've had in terms of fan engagement, how they've went about their business, how they've maybe led with the commercial chin as opposed to, which is, again, not illegitimate. We're a business and we need to make money to do the things on the pitch that we really want to see. But yeah, I think we need to see more of that and more clarity and communication. Some of the steps recently in terms of board members coming out and giving interviews, etc., haven't been great. They haven't landed particularly well. What people are just looking for is a little bit more of a contract between, right, are you really in this with us? Are we here? And it can't always just be a case of, yeah, but we wrote some checks previously, so therefore you shouldn't ask any questions. That's not how Rangers work, and it's certainly not how they will work in anybody else's mind. So, yeah, it all comes back eventually to, if we get something on the pitch, everybody goes into the rest of the week fairly happy. So let's pull together and hope for that. I think touched on a few things there in terms of the injuries, etc. I think the start will be really important. If we can start really brightly and we go at them and we maybe get a few shots on target, get a goal or whatever, everybody gets a lift in the stadium, that will transfer itself, all that kind of good stuff. But if we see the way that we've started games being replicated, I'm putting Aberdeen aside, and Aberdeen are poor side as well, right? I'm not that I'm being pessimistic this morning, but I'm not going fully on the way of the bandwagon with that performance. I need to see it replicated a few other times before I think we're out of some of the wilderness, and maybe the feeling about Gio starts to turn as well. But if we start with a bit of a slow handbrake on, it might just be a bit of a turgid evening, and I don't think that plays into the narrative or what the fans are looking to hear as well. I think most fans, interested in your view or the view in the comments, I think most fans would not take a defeat tonight. I'm not saying that, right? But if it came out that we went and we had a real go and we absolutely went for them, 90 minutes, slugging it out, toes on the line, nobody blinks, and they come away with the win, I think people would be accepting of it to a degree of, well, thank God we finally went for it. I don't think people want to see cagey football. Go at it like we went against Aberdeen, as opposed to the way that we've played the rest of the Champions League games.
100% agree with you. I think this is a case where it's the performance is more important than the result, to be honest.
Agreed.
This is all about, I think, giving hope to people. And I think that's why Saturday was so important, because people looked at it and thought, right, okay, now I can see it. I can see the philosophy. I can see what he's trying to do. But that needs to be something that you can see every week. It can't be like 1 week I can see evidence, and the next week there's no evidence whatsoever. Listen, one of the things I wanted just to touch on, just based on a couple of questions here, just about the recruitment. Now, it's been generally discussed amongst fans that recruitment's not been good enough. Alfred here saying the recruitment board needs to be sacked. Now, what I would say about that, first and foremost, is the recruitment team that was responsible for the summer dealings has left.
Yeah.
There's a completely new recruitment team in. We won't know how good they are or what they're capable of doing until January. But obviously, John Park's come in. Has got a team of I think it's off the top of my head, it's something like 35 scouts around the world underneath him. So, but the reason I want to just touch on this, Tommy, is I'm looking at those 7 signings that have been made. We can obviously say John Souttar is not. That does not look like it's working out at the moment based on the fact that he's been injured for so long. But I think he's got a longer term contract, and I don't think probably after 1 year you would want to judge it. You would want to give that a judgment call Well, I suppose it depends on how long he's out for. But that one, that still, the jury is very much out. But I look at the 7 and I think Antonio Cholak, that's been an outstanding success. Brilliant signing. Tom Lawrence, before his injury, looked really, really good, I thought. A big, important part. Ben Davies, I think, is looking like he's going to be a top signing. So you factor in the fact that in the small bits that we've seen of Yilmaz, he's starting to look the part. You're going, right, actually, a lot of this criticism could melt away over time if they continue the trajectories they're all on. I suppose a lot of it will depend on their injury profile, because there's nothing that frustrates fans more than signing a player who comes in and then just you can't use. But it really just kind of does leave Rabbi Matondo as something of an outlier, as someone who's come in and just hasn't really worked at all to date. There is signs, at least with the rest of them, that there's something there. Would you agree with that?
I do, yeah. Davies, Lawrence, and Cholak, yeah, absolutely. I think maybe a victim of circumstance with the Matondo thing, in terms of he's not shown anything, but probably the primacy in people's minds is that we've known for a long time as fans that we've got a right wing problem.
That's absolutely spot on.
And then he's the purchase, and it doesn't work. It doesn't even look close to working. Now, I get he's a young guy and anything can change over time, but for such an important, visible space within the team, that's probably what needed to be absolutely sorted. I would probably then switch to the midfield. Needed an uplift.
Yeah.
And we didn't do that. So, yes, absolutely agree with everything you've said there, but I think it's legitimate for fans to also say, you know, what I've just said in terms of we've got these headline acts, and then you look at some other things that have led to maybe some of that feeling we didn't naturally sort out the goalkeeper situation. What does that look like? I know McCrory signed an extension, but what does it look like on an ongoing succession basis? Because there's not a great feeling around McLaughlin. Then you look at the fullback positions, you know, Yilmaz to one side and Barisic, but what happened with the right back position? It looks like Tavernier doesn't have an actual prod in the back from somebody competing with them to a large extent. And then some of those injury things with Suter and all that. And I think it is the defensive one maybe crystallises around the fact that people will latch on to, well, why did he sign Suter in the first place?
Yeah.
Well, he was signed knowing the risks, but because we had a Goldson, a Sands, a Davies, etc., I think there's maybe just one other missing in there. But yeah, it depends what side of the bed you get out of and what side of the coin you look at, whether you want to be really positive about that or not. As you said, a lot of the team has been migrated out. There'll be a new structure in there. The question always comes back to, what's Ross Wilson's absolute philosophy? What's he doing in that space? How much power does he have versus the manager? Now, I know it's a collective decision to make signings, but it would be good to hear more from Ross Wilson in terms of the maturity or the maturing nature of our scouting facilities and what we are intending to do, because they're supposed to be big lists. He had a great reputation when he came up here. It's been relatively positive, actually. I mean, I think Ross Wilson gets not unfair criticism, but I think some people pour in other things that don't naturally need to be in there. So, yeah, I mean, if they can then solve some of the equations of another person in the forward line, and then what happens if you lose your Kent, your Morelos, etc., what does that look like? And, you know, people think maybe that there's lots of money sitting in a war chest somewhere. I'll use that old phrase, right, because it makes me smile. It's not naturally the case. What we need to do is make sure that we are developing players as well. But I think it's legitimate to sometimes criticise, because the visible positions in terms of right wing, etc., have not worked. And for me, Fashion Sakala is not the answer. That maybe makes me an outlier, but he's definitely not the answer for me.
Well, I totally understand why you're saying that, because I've been saying that for months and months and months. But the thing about Fashion Sakala that I like, Tommy, and certainly for the rest of this season, well up until the January break. Well, there's not a January break this year, is there? Because of the World Cup. But you know what I mean? After the World Cup, I think Fashion Sakala gives you that level of just insistent drive towards the goal. Sometimes he's going to fall over the ball. Sometimes he's going to trip over the ball. Sometimes he's going to fall flat on his face. But you know what? He'll keep doing it, and he'll do it time after time and time again. And of those 20 times that he does it, 5 times he'll get in and deliver a really, really good ball. So it's just, for me, he's a great volume player, which is why he'll get goals and assists. But listen, you're of the same generation as I am. He's not the kind of player that would have survived in previous Rangers teams, I think, over the years, because there was a certain level of class that you had to be at and a certain level of consistent delivery that you had to be at to kind of survive at Rangers in the days of Gascoigne and Laudrup and McCoist, and you look at Fashion Sakala and you go, sometimes technically good and sometimes technically not good. And that's frustrating. But in the meantime, for me, out of the players that are there on the right wing, he's the answer. I totally agree with everything you've said, actually. The big thing for me about the recruitment is that lack of energy in midfield. I know people don't like this. I know it's not popular, but I'm here to give my opinion and not just say things people like. I look at Lewis Ferguson and what he's doing at Bologna, and I think £3 million, a Scottish player who knows the league, who could have come in. That's still quite a lot of money for Rangers, £3 million. So it doesn't have to be that. You look at Rio Hatate, played at Celtic, £1 million, arguably the best midfielder in Scotland this season so far. I just think a lack of dynamism in there is really, really costing the club. For me, Lundstrom can play as an 8 more often. I want to see that more often. Arfield can obviously play in there. Tillman can play in there. Are any of those players naturally always going to be 8s? I mean, Lundstrom's a guy who can play multiple positions. Tillman's more of a 10, I would argue. Arfield, yes, but he's 33. So Lawrence, again, more of a winger, I would argue, than a number 8, although he's been playing in there for Rangers. So I'd love to have seen the club go out, as everyone said, and I said on this podcast prior to the transfer window closing, they need to go and get a box-to-box midfielder. And they didn't do it. And I think the club's paying for that, domestically especially.
Yeah, again, I think that's fairly legitimate stuff. I might not go all the way with you in terms of Lewis Ferguson, just because the type of player he's been. But I absolutely get your point. It's completely logical in terms of he has went abroad and he's doing, particularly well. I always thought the Rangers had to add into the midfield as well. We didn't do it. It probably leads you into a wider question, going back to the way the fans are looking at recruitment, etc., which is, if we all saw it, why did we prioritise getting another fullback in on the left side or whatever, And I get we need Yilmaz there. Barisic hasn't been particularly at it, so it's good to get him, some competition. But was it the priority in terms of or getting somebody in who had that energy? You referenced, I don't particularly like referencing other teams' players, but you referenced Rio Hatate there, who, does have bags of energy and can play a bit. And like you said, the spend there from having, so you're combining a few things. 1, the cheapness of the spend. 2, the scouting network that goes out, in Japan. And I know obviously that's where Ange Postecoglou would come from. But are we looking in those markets? That's a good spend. They'll make money on him, and he answers a question in the middle of the park, and he's a decent player. We absolutely needed that type of player in there as well, which would have allowed the other players to do their jobs. Because right now it's a bit of, right, can you do this? Can you also do that? Sometimes Lundstrom looks a little bit constrained because he's having to sit back further, whereas I think he can be slightly more expressive further forward. You drop in Davies, Kamara's back, thankfully. I think there's a conundrum in there that we don't naturally get the best out. Ryan Jack, will he ever be the Ryan Jack that we saw under Steven Gerrard, given his injury basis? Not entirely sure he will. He certainly won't be as consistent on it. So, yeah, I agree with you. We should have filled the midfield space, and if there's time, ability, money, and patience in January, then, or post-World Cup, I should say, then we should absolutely be looking to drop somebody into that. The problem is bedding them in halfway through a season.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, listen, Tommy, it's been brilliant. You've lived up to your billing as esteemed. So well done.
I don't know if the comments kind of agree with you on that, but I'll take it.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. Listen, we're going to wrap it up right there. It's been great. 34 minutes is way more than what I said I would keep you for. So thank you for coming on. It's been a delight. Of course, you are the managing editor of This Is Ibrox. So let's give that site a wee plug. Tell us what you do. I'm sure everyone knows, but let's do it anyway. Where can they find you? Where are you? Give us the full boona.
You're very kind there, Jonny. So you can find us on all the platforms that you would expect. On Twitter, This Is Ibrox. You can get us on TikTok, Facebook, website, thisisibrox.wixsite.com. We find us on our YouTube as well. Lots of content, regular briefings, interviews, all the good stuff. Please come along, join the growing band, and get involved.
Terrific. Thanks, Tommy. Right, guys, we're going to call it a day there. You can get us tomorrow, obviously. Actually, we'll be back on tonight after the game from Ibrox. Myself and Josh are there, as I said earlier. So we will be live with the press conferences and post-match. Then we'll be back in tomorrow with Derek hosting, so we can have a chat about hopefully what will be a very positive Rangers performance. So we're going to call it